Yes, welcome back to This Is Us versus Life. And what we're going to do on today's show, today's episode, whatever you want to call it, is we're going to kind of put together a lot of what we've been talking about already. And then we're going to move on into the other topic areas of life as if you've been listening what I've talked about. We get into, career choices and paths and a lot of other parts of life, right? But I want to just bring it all together if I can so that hopefully it will help the bigger picture before we get to the point of talking about other things. As I have stated before, right? So if you this is the first video or episode or show that you're going to listen to, then I'm going to try to put it together for you a little bit, but I would encourage you, as I always say, to go back and listen to our other videos, episodes, podcasts, however you want to describe them, right? So in our first, one of our first, actually it was the first, in our first upload, we talked about history a little bit. And we kind of talked about history from the standpoint of how we view life coming into existence. And purposely, we kept it really simple, really, really simple. Not to be dismissive of the complexities of how life can come into existence, but to frame it so that we can really hone in on the conceptual parts of it and not get lost in too much of the details. That was the intention. So what we talked about, and I'm going to recap as I stated, so that we could all understand very simply and very easily. There can be a lot of debate, maybe if you want to call it debate or discussion or whatever word you want to use around life and its origin. But I think what most people can agree to is that, hey, I believe that a man and a woman came together for most of us, and that process led to a new life, and then that cycle, that process repeated and just became a cycle, right? So, as we were saying, when we were talking about our history, we were talking about just going backwards in time and just saying, well, if it happened for me, it happened for my parents, and it happened for their parents, it happened for their parents, as far as we know. Um, you know, there are some other things that can be discussed, but we're going to put those to the side if we can, like I said, just to keep it simple, right? So, when we look at our history and our origin in that context, perhaps we could say that, the life that we come into knowing once we get to a certain age, it came from a man and a woman in some form or fashion, right? And if you're saying this is really simple, that's good. That's the intention. It's just to establish that baseline of that. There's a lot of other things that can be said around that, but at its core, what we're suggesting here is that is the core of the origin of existence. And so, again, man and woman comes together, and woman gives birth to your life, right? if you want to add to that, then you can put that in the comments. But again, we're just trying to get to a point and move forward, because ultimately what we're doing is we're establishing a foundation, and I will explain more about what I mean by that, and as we move into what this video is about. And then so we kind of talked about happiness, right? Because we're kind of fast forwarding through life, and we kind of talked about what is happiness to you, how do you define it, things like that. There's other details that can go along with that, but again, as you come into your understanding of your life, perhaps you may um, have sought out happiness, and I think that's what a lot of us have done. As was stated in another video, I don't know that many people seek out things that'll make them unhappy, right? The majority of people would probably seek out happiness. So that's kind of like the point of this channel and this initiative is, we fight for happiness each day, right? And it is just that, it is an effort to obtain that. And then we came into talking about, do you have value and do you matter, right? So, you kind of get into, establishing what is happiness to you, and then you solidify that by saying, what value do I have? Do I matter? And what has value to me and what matters to me, right? These things are, in my opinion, interconnected. And if you follow this series of topics, you know that when I say, in my opinion, I mean in my observation of things that have actually happened numerous times. I'm not just forming my own, basis to speak in regard to these topics. It is through observation, both the start and the end result, right? So, I think all we can do with that is say, well, this happened, and then here's the outcome. Once you see that a number of times, you can perhaps decide that I have a conclusion here, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. And then we kind of got into relationships, what entails a good relationship, and maybe in a way it was explaining what does not, but certainly the intention was to just talk about what would a good relationship be made of. So again, I don't want to lose anyone, and I hope that everyone sticks with me here. We started with our history, then we moved into what is happiness, right? And again, to kind of go back further into happiness, it's like that is like kind of the purpose of life, in part, right? And then we went into, do you have value, do you matter, and what matters to you, and what has value. There's a reason for those questions and the way these things are being put together, put forth. And I hope you see it, because if you are happy individually, then that is great. But also, how do you view life around you becomes important, because if you view those things a certain way, they could negatively impact your happiness. That's why it's important to look outside of yourself, even if you have internal happiness, so you can be aware of what could potentially interrupt or attempt to, right, interrupt your happiness. And that is relationships, because you're dealing with other people or things or whatever. And that's more in depth in the video, because, relationships, span a number of different types. So then we kind of went into choice, the power of choice, how important it is to respect our our ability to choose was being highlighted. Not that anybody didn't know that, but it's just being reinforced. And as was explained, some of the most profound things are not just explained but stated. Some of the most profound things in life have to make sense, or else it doesn't mean anything to you individually. That's why, one of the biggest goals here is to keep things simple so that we can all understand and find value in it because we understand it. And then also, if you understand it, you can say, I don't find value in it. But first, the understanding must be there, right? Because there could be some great information that if we don't understand it, then we lose it. We miss out on it. So, choice, very important. Talked about more in the prior episode or video or discussion, whatever word you would like to use. And then we talked about who are you as an individual? Because if you've now said, I kind of understand how I got here, my origin, at least in part, right? I understand my happiness and what it is to me, understand my value and how I value other things and if I matter, etc., etc. And I am approaching relationships in a good way and I'm making good choices. Then it becomes, well, who does that make you? Right? So we ask the question, who are you then if you have established these things or at least attempted to? Well, who are you now? Right? So then we go into what path did we choose with all of those things that we just recapped multiple times, right? What path did we take that information and set ourselves on? So what we're doing, right, is we're highlighting two things. One, if you're equipped with all of those, all of that prior knowledge, then perhaps you could choose the best path for yourself or a better path. Two, if you don't, if you feel you didn't choose the best path for you, at least for now, perhaps the understanding of these things prior to the discussion about path selection will help us understand that, yeah, maybe if I had more happiness, I would have chose a different path, or if I had better relationships, or if I understood more about who I was or who I am in terms of my history of my life and my origin. You see what I'm saying? I hope you do. And if I value myself and others in a certain way, I may have chosen a different path, right? Because once you start choosing that path, you're kind of locking yourself in. That's discussed in that episode, in that video, or podcast, however you want to frame it. And then we talked about time because if you then have chosen a path, as was just saying, you're kind of locked in a way, not saying you can't change, but at some point you're making some path decision for some set or certain amount of time, right? So hopefully you can start to see how it kind of flows together, right? And then, it was talking about in that episode that time is the great equalizer. Why? Why was that stated? Because if you have respect for time, then we can understand that if I chose the wrong path or a path that wasn't as best as I could have chosen, if I have a respect for time, I realize I can overcome that. But if my time perception is, you know, in framed in a certain way, as talked about in the episode, like if to me I figure, hey, 6 months is a long time. Everything is predicated on 6 months of time. That would be wrong because life is typically longer than that, and that's what that's talking about. Let time be the great equalizer because whether we want it to or not, it's gonna take place, right? We're all gonna live and die. That's an example and not to be dark, but that is one of the ultimate examples of that. And then there's a time period. You don't know when it's going to start and end, but understand that you should be looking at the big picture. You don't want to make decisions off of a small part of the big picture that affects the big picture. We want to make decisions all inclusive as best as we can, as Jess was summarized as I just stated. So hopefully I didn't lose anybody. I hope you stay with me on this one, because what we're going to try to do as we kind of went back and went through the different topics, we're trying to show the connection there, trying to highlight it. And again, now we want to culminate, we want to summate, we want to summarize all of those things. This is not everything, it's not all inclusive, but it's some of the most prominent things in our lives. Time, choosing the right path, understanding who we are, understanding the power of choice and respecting it, building good relationships, understanding our value and the value of those around us and the value of things around us and what do we value and all that stuff, and then what is happiness, and like I said at the beginning, the history. So what we want to do now, as I just said, is now state the last part of this. You put all these things together, what brings all of this together? The title of this episode would be, or is going to be, how do you define love? And there you have it. Because when you put all of the pieces together that are summarized, then they come together at a meeting point. And hopefully for you and me and all of us, we could see how love is what can bring all of these things to a point where they could be executed at the highest level. So, again, remember the title. How do you define love, for example? That question is asked for a purpose, right? Because perhaps someone would make an argument that, hey, love isn't an ultimate in life. It is a part of life. Everybody talks about it, but some people may say it's overemphasized, it's inflated in its importance. I would push back against that. And this is what we're going to discuss in this last likely episode of this series, right? So let's give some examples. But before we get into the examples, let's go back to the Us versus Life song for a moment. Play a little bit more of that. If you listen to the other episodes or videos, you know that I'm a fan of it. I hope that you like it as well, and we will be right back. All right, and we are back Once again, we're going to talk about how do you define love? How do I define love? And hopefully it will be helpful to myself and to anyone listening or anyone that will hear this. That's the point of this initiative, Us versus Life. So we're all living life together, and that's explained more in other episodes. So let's talk about an example of how we can explain why love can bring together those topic areas of life that I summarized a little bit ago. So when we look at love, right, you have to have some type of example. I almost wanted to say, unfortunately, uh, but I don't want to use that word here. Um, we'll come back to how we want to word that part. But be that as it may, you likely need an example either in your own life or through observation to so it can start clicking, right? Because that can be the missing piece if you push back and say, hey, love is not enough. So here's an example. We get right to it, not trying to prolong it. So it, if you are a person that has a high level, and we talked about levels, remember, or if this is your first episode, you got to understand where we're coming from over here. We're talking about levels. I love everybody in existence, but do I love everybody the same? That would be a no. I would not lie to anyone and say I love every single person as much as I love, uh, say, someone that's closer to me. Okay? So you have to put that in that perspective, right? You have to have that perspective going into this. But let's say you can imagine the person that you love the most, or something that's not a person that you love the most. What would you sacrifice for that thing or that person? So this is how you know. Some people, right? Let's say, for example, for some people that could be their kids, right? For some people, they will gladly, willingly, and with a great level of determination and whatever words you want to use or any adjective, they will essentially give their own life for the lives of their kids or their kid, right? This is how you know the power of love. It's because they love them, you see. So this is an example of how you know, a simple one, of how you know how powerful it is. So let's say, for example, a person has $5 million, right? They've worked hard all their life and they have $5 million in the bank, and uh, someone comes along and says, give me the $5 million or I take your child, right? You see what I'm saying? There are just some things that have more value than others. And the medium through which that is expressed, it's called love, right? Um, and that's just one example, right? So what I'm trying to do is establish the credibility around love by using that one example. As we continue to talk, and hope you stick with me, maybe it will become more clear if you don't already agree, right? Because my next question, now that I've given you an example of the power of love, and what we are willing to do when we have love at a certain level. Let's just kind of break it down a little bit, then we'll come back to the point that we just made, to the level of the point we just made. So we talked about levels, right? Let's say if you see a homeless person on the street, right? Very simple, one that a lot of people can relate to. And for some people, they may say, hey, I feel something for that person without knowing if they're just scamming or all that stuff. Let's just put all that aside. So you have a level, if you do, of say empathy or even sympathy or some form of love. Some people, like myself, would say, hey, I love everybody to a certain extent, right? Then you contrast that with if that was your own child homeless on the street and how you feel. This is the dynamics and the power of love. But yet and still, with that dynamic and those levels being there, certainly there are people that sacrifice their lives in terms of their time and efforts to help those people that may be in a situation like that that's not uh, one of their children. So we pause just for a little bit, and hopefully that's starting to sink in. On the scale of measures, right, the levels, if we're talking about just a little bit of love, how far it can go, how powerful it is. And then if you move up that scale, right, like I said, to if it's someone close to you, you see how far someone can go. There's not a lot of things in life you could say that about. So when you have love um, for something or someone, it's almost infinite the possibilities that can happen because of that. So so you take that information, right? And then if that's not, well, that's one part of it, right? We're going to talk about it from a different angle. We're going to talk about it from an angle of, again, how do you define love, right? That's like more of a logical approach to it, more so than an emotional approach to it, which is kind of what I was just talking about. It's more on the emotional side, though it does have logic. But more on the logical approach, you kind of look at it and you say, well, how do I define it? And what words would I use to myself to define it? Well, put it in the comments, please, and you tell me your definition of what love is, right? I think this is important that you can define it to yourself because that will establish a foundation, right? And foundation is important because that's what we were attempting to do with this series of episodes about these series of topics was establish a foundation for yourself and myself as we move forward always because this came before the discussion of how do you get to the money and the success as measured by money and anything else. These things don't have a lot to do with money. They're foundational, they're core, or they should be core to yourself because when you get to that level of us versus life, for example, this channel, these shows, these episodes, helping you by way of myself and SME subject matter experts coming in and talking about how they got to a point of success to you. If you achieve that same success, your life won't be predicated solely on those successes, those outcomes of those successes in terms of maybe material things that you buy and things like that. You will be built on a foundation of some of the topics that we talked about. That way, those things that may happen for you in the future, and I hope they do, will be, as they say, icing on the cake. And again, no matter how those things turn out in whatever level, you will have some balance there to say, I'm okay because I'm built on a solid foundation, if that makes sense to you. So we're talking about the definition, and what I would say to you is that love should be unconditional. I think I mentioned that in one of the prior episodes, and that's what I would uh, put forth to you is that love should be unconditional. So when we say that word unconditional, not that you may not know what it means, and I'm sure you do, but what I would encourage us to do, as I've said before, is to make sure we understand the simplicity around what we're saying, the words we're using, in this language, right? And even if you do know, it's not a bad idea to reiterate them to yourself, right? It's kind of just like restate those things to yourself so that we're clear. So I would encourage you to look at the definition of unconditional, right? And read that and then apply that to love, right? And so what I'm going to do as well is right here on the spot, I'm going to say to you that unconditional means not subject to any conditions, right? So if your definition of love differs from that, then I would, what's the word to use? Recommend what I'm proposing to you is that you make your love unconditional, right? No matter what conditions your love operates under, it remains. The love remains. Because I think, based on observation, what happens is plenty of people have love for something or someone, but conditions change and they allow the conditions to change the level of love that they have, right? So let's be unconditional is the point that I'm trying to get across. And no matter what happens, if you can, try to be unconditional in your love, because that would be authentic if you're being honest. And if you don't feel, this is the benefit of it, if you don't truly feel authentic about it, this unconditional love can expose that. Because what you can say to yourself is, if I will allow a condition to change my level of love for whatever it may be, then I know I don't truly love whatever it is to the level that's likely necessary. So you're just being honest, and it's helping you see that. It's not anything to be, that you need to shy away from. You should embrace it and say, hey, if this doesn't happen this way, then my love changes. That's your truth. Then live it. But understand this, that is not the best approach. The best approach is to be unconditional. So that's what you want to strive for, and hopefully I didn't lose anyone on that one. If you understand that, then you can say honestly to yourself, I must not have the level of love I need to have if these conditions could change my level of love. So then you know where you need to get to. You understand? Then you know what you need to get to, the level you need to get to. And so again, what we've done is we've talked about some topics of life, and we've shown where the intersection of all these topics come together. Again, just to recap, they are uh, history, knowing your origin of life, right? And then knowing what is happiness to you and having a definition for that as well uh, through your lived experience or changes you may decide to make. And defining value for yourself and others, and understanding to yourself, do you matter first? And then if someone else says you don't matter, you're not too worried about it because you know that you do. And then relationships, right, which ties right along with that, because you start to understand how to have a good relationship, and power of choice. You make good choices, how to make better choices. You understand how powerful it is. You understand who you are there for, because you understand all of those things prior to that. And then you look at the path that you put yourself on for a certain amount of time, and then you respect time as being a supreme part of life. It is, in my words, the great equalizer, right? And then you realize that all these things culminate into, they come together into love. So I want to encourage you to leave a comment about what you think about love, what your definition of love is, whether you think love is enough, or whether you think love is not enough. Because I know that some people feel that way, but I gave some examples, really simple, not as many as I could. I could be here all day to try to show you the power of love and what people will do when they have a certain level of love. So, yeah, put that in the comments. Um, and I hope you enjoyed this series of topics. As previously stated, we're going to try to get into some other aspects of life from here going forward. But we wanted to establish a strong foundation for ourselves, uh, and hopefully we were able to do so with these series of discussions. So I wish you the best. Now's the time. This is the place where we fight for happiness each day. It's us versus life. And we will catch you on the next one.